Hello everyone. On a peaceful Sunday morning, the soft autumn light kissed the cobblestones of Beacon Hill. The traditional Michaud family home, built in brownstone style, hosted its traditional monthly family brunch. The dining room, surrounded by antique furniture, was filled with the soft glow of a chandelier that had been passed down through generations. By the window, a Boston fern, which the Michaud family had tenderly cared for over 150 years, elegantly spread its green fronds. The history of the plant was intertwined with the history of the house itself. "Kate, did you make this quiche yourself?" asked Pat Michaud, lifting her silver dessert fork with a faintly sarcastic smile. Her elegant appearance in a tweed jacket embodied Boston high society. She was as skillful with French cuisine as her Coca-Cola beans were always a hit at church charity events. Catherine Michaud momentarily flinched at her mother-in-law's words, but maintained her elegant smile. Her poise in a navy cashmere dress reflected the confidence she had cultivated during her years in investment banking. "Yes, I consulted Julia Child's French cookbook. I hear Julia lived here in Beacon Hill." Across the table, her husband, Bert, awkwardly cleared his throat. His gesture of running his fingers through his graying hair lacked his usual composure. For 3 years, Kate, a successful senior analyst at a bank, had been dealing with subtle tensions during these elegant Sunday brunches. "Hey Kate." A cheerful voice broke the tension. It was her sister-in-law, Emily. "Would you help me with my wedding preparations? We're planning the ceremony at the cathedral, followed by a reception at the Four Seasons." Emily, a brilliant pediatrician, had always been a warm ally to Kate. "Of course, whatever you need," Kate responded. At that moment, Patricia set down her treasured Wedgwood teacup and casually remarked, "But darling, you're not familiar with high society etiquette, are you? Our traditional style could be quite different. For example, even addressing wedding invitations has rather complex rules." The fine china rattled slightly as Kate's hands flinched. Robert glanced at his wife but again couldn't bring himself to speak. His silence made the heavy atmosphere in the house even denser. "Mom," Emily said quietly but firmly, "Kate is my sister-in-law. She's family. Her taste is impeccable." Everyone praised her speech at the recent charity gala. Patricia smiled elegantly. "Yes, of course," she said, her voice warm but her eyes cold. "It's just that the Michaud family traditions must be preserved, especially since Emily's wedding will be the talk of Boston." The sunlight remained warm, the silver cutlery shone beautifully, and the floral arrangement on the table was perfect. The dedicated florist of the Michaud family had served the house for over 30 years. Yet, in this elegant space, invisible cracks were silently spreading, one after another. Kate sipped her tea and straightened her back. Coming from a middle-class family, she had graduated from a prestigious university on a scholarship and had built her current position through talent and hard work. For her, these brunch hours felt like an elegant social masquerade ball. Standing in front of the fireplace where Shay's photograph hung, she sometimes felt that she would always be a substitute. "By the way," Patricia said as if suddenly remembering something, "next Wednesday there's an executive committee meeting for the St. Paul's Church charity event, Kate. Would you like to join, of course, if your work schedule allows?" The sarcasm in those words was evident. No matter how well-dressed she was, or how perfect her manners, in the eyes of her mother-in-law, she would always be an outsider. Still, Kate smiled. "Thank you, Patricia. I'd be happy to join. I can adjust my client meetings." Because this too was an investment. This time, however, the investment was in her future, with her beloved husband. Outside the window, Boston's aged cityscape seemed to silently observe centuries of history in the large mirror of the past. In the luxurious bridal salon on Newbury Street, Emily's reflection glowed. The pure organza white silk dress expanded around her like a cloud. The afternoon light streaming through the windows made the beaded embroidery shimmer. "She looks like an angel," Patricia said, tears welling in her eyes. Her Hermes scarf fluttered with her emotional gesture. "It reminds me of Shay's wedding dress. She was just as beautiful, too." Kate stepped back discreetly, silently observing this touching moment. As Emily's maid of honor, she had been invited to the final dress fitting. Though her appearance in a navy Chanel suit didn't clash in this salon, she couldn't help but feel a subtle distance. "Kate, would you take a picture?" Emily called cheerfully. But before she could respond, Patricia quickly interjected. "Oh, I'll take it. This will be an important family memory." Everyone in the room understood the implicit meaning of those words. Kate silently agreed and pulled out a business card for a professional photographer from her Hermes bag. "This photographer always handles our corporate events at the bank. Should I make a reservation for the wedding day?" Kate asked. "Wonderful," Emily replied. Meanwhile, Patricia pursed her lips. "But we have our traditional photographer, who has captured all the Michaud family weddings." "Mother," Emily said through the mirror, "I want to use the photographer Kate suggested. I've seen her portfolio, and her work is beautiful." Patricia's expression froze for a moment. "Well, do as you wish." However, she gave Kate a meaningful look. Decisions that ignore tradition come with their own consequences. The private dining room at the Bristol in the Four Seasons Hotel was bathed in the soft afternoon light. The crystal chandeliers emitted a warm glow, and the white damask tablecloths were beautifully arranged. Jessica, the wedding planner, picked up her clipboard gracefully. "At the main table will be the immediate members of both families." "One moment," Emily suddenly interjected. "Kate's name isn't on the family table." Patricia calmly explained. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Just a misunderstanding. But changes would be difficult at this point, wouldn't they?" "It's not a problem," Jessica tried to quickly respond. "I can make the adjustment." "Well," Patricia interrupted with a smile, "with so many guests for the rehearsal dinner, rearranging the seating might inconvenience other guests." Kate stood up silently. Her heels made a small clicking sound on the marble floor. "Don't worry, Patricia. I'm fine at another table." At that moment, Robert unusually intervened. "No, that's wrong. Kate is my wife. She should be at the main table." The atmosphere in the room froze. Patricia looked at her son, and her eyes held a coldness he had never seen before. Sitting on an elegant sofa beneath the luxurious chandelier, Kate was checking work emails on her tablet while waiting for her husband. She overheard a conversation from a nearby table. "Yes, Patricia says that investment banker woman took advantage of her son's weakness. Well, she is very different from Shay, who was so cultured. How dare she, with no family background?" Kate's fingers stopped on the tablet screen. She felt her spine freeze as her cheeks burned. "Excuse me for interrupting your gossip," she suddenly said. James, Emily's fiancé, the cardiac surgeon, turned to the women with a truly gentlemanly attitude. "Don't you think making such rude speculations about other people's lives goes against Boston's high society etiquette?" The women flushed and quickly left their seats. James sat beside Kate. "Don't let Aunt Patricia bother you. She's trapped in her own values, but that's her problem, not yours." Kate gave him a grateful smile, but her eyes couldn't hide her anxiety about tomorrow's wedding. Through these 3 scenes, the invisible threads of tension gradually tightened. It was like a silent tectonic shift beneath the elegant mask of Boston high society, and everyone was beginning to feel that this tension would soon reach a breaking point. Outside the window, Boston's streetlights began to flicker on, one by one, and the silence of the wedding eve enveloped the city. However, this silence was just a momentary calm before the approaching storm. Boston's twilight cast a deep indigo light through the stained glass windows of the Four Seasons Hotel. In the grand ballroom, over 300 guests were immersed in the melody of a classical string quartet. The white and gold decorations elegantly reflected the light from chandeliers that boasted years of history. Emily was a bride who seemed to have stepped out of a painting. Her custom Vera Wang gown added supreme elegance to her dignified bearing. As a physician, her vows at the altar powerfully resonated in the silence, and tears of emotion shimmered in the eyes of the guests. The newlywed couple was greeted with warm applause from the guests. Kate, perfectly fulfilling her role as maid of honor, could feel the dominating presence of her mother-in-law. Patricia gracefully exchanged words with Boston's notables, like a queen of high society. "It was a marvelous ceremony," exclaimed a trustee of the Boston Symphony Orchestra admiringly, beautifully continuing the Michaud family tradition. "Thank you." Patricia's voice was full of pride and confidence. "Our family has done so for generations." At that moment, waiters began serving the main course. Silver cloches were lifted one after another, releasing rich aromas. Selected wines were poured into glasses, making the crystal sparkle. However, nothing was placed in front of Kate. At first she thought it was just a mistake. But as dishes were served at all the surrounding tables, her place remained empty. An unsettling atmosphere began to spread amongst those at the table. "Excuse me," Kate called to a nearby waiter, trying to be as discreet as possible. "My meal is yet to come." The young waiter seemed confused and exchanged glances with the maitre d'. Then Patricia's cold voice rang out. "You should be grateful to just be allowed to sit here." Those words cut through the glamorous atmosphere of the banquet like a sheet of ice. The 300 guests were instantly wrapped in absolute silence. Emily was stunned. The groom, James, frowned, and Bert stared at his mother with an expression he'd never seen before. Kate slowly removed the napkin from her lap and placed it on the table. Dressed in a Chanel evening gown, she stood gracefully. Her gesture carried the dignity of an analyst who had successfully closed numerous major negotiations on Wall Street. "Then this outsider will take her leave." Her tone was transparent and sharp, as if years of patience had crystallized into a single instant. Immediately, the blood drained from Patricia's face. It was a moment when the mask of the Boston society queen shattered before everyone's eyes. "Wait, please," Patricia cried, but her voice no longer held a shred of elegance. She stood up in a fluster, knocking over her wine glass. The deeply red wine spilled onto the pristine white tablecloth. The scene seemed to anticipate the chaos to come. "Mother!" Robert stood up. "This is unforgivable. Kate is my wife. I am proud of her for silently enduring your harassment for these 3 years." Emily was weeping in her pure white wedding dress. "Mother! How could you do this?" Murmurs rippled through the venue. The dignitaries of Boston high society lowered their gazes in shame. The church chairman looked deeply affected, and the members of the charity board exchanged glances. Then Jessica, the wedding planner, confessed in a trembling voice. "Actually, I received special instructions from Patricia not to prepare a meal for Kate." Her words caused further shock. In the venue, the Michaud family's reputation, built over many years, was crumbling. Patricia's social circle began to distance themselves from her, one by one. "This is something," a reporter from the society section of the Boston Globe whispered to their neighbor. "I can already see tomorrow's headline." The setting sun sank into the post-rain sky. Its deep crimson light filtered through the large windows of the ballroom. That light silently illuminated the family on the verge of dramatic change. A tense atmosphere filled the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel. The lights of the chandeliers continued to shine elegantly, but now they relentlessly illuminated a family falling apart. Large tears fell onto Emily's pure white wedding dress. James gently held the bride's shoulders, desperately supporting her. The 300 guests watched the unfolding events with bated breath, as if witnessing high society's finest drama. "Mother, why?" Emily's voice trembled. "It's my wedding day. Why would you do this?" When Jessica, the wedding planner, spoke again, her voice carried a new determination. "I will tell everything. This is part of my professional responsibility." Patricia frantically tried to stop her, but it was too late. Patricia's instructions began when the wedding preparations started. Jessica operated her tablet with trembling hands, opening the saved emails. From the dress photo shoot to the rehearsal dinner, the seating arrangements, today's meal, everything had been planned. "You wanted to ruin my marriage." Kate's voice was calm but intense. Emotions flickered in her eyes. "No," Patricia cried. "I was just trying to protect the family." Anxiety spread beneath her perfect makeup. The Michaud family has been the pride of Boston for generations. That bloodline. The bloodline. Bert's voice resonated deeply. "Mother, we're living in the 21st century. Do you realize how many people your outdated thinking has hurt?" Then another voice rose from the back of the hall. "May I speak?" Margaret Williams, the associate priest of St. Paul's Church, stepped forward. She had been trusted as the spiritual pillar of the Michaud family for over 30 years. "Patricia, you confessed your true feelings to me during last month's confession." Margaret's voice was warm but firm. "You are too trapped in your feelings for Shay. It is not love, but a prison of your own making, of your own pride." The blood drained from Patricia's face. Her hands began to tremble. But Shay was perfect. She came from a noble Boston family. She was cultured. My ideal. Shay is gone. Robert's voice rang out, quietly but decisively. In a car accident 7 years ago. She's not coming back. And Kate is not a substitute. She is the new light in my life. Emily stood up weeping. Mother, I can't stay silent anymore. Do you remember when Kate was hospitalized? A new tension rippled through the hall. Last year, during her acute cholecystitis, you hesitated to go to the hospital. You said it would affect the Michaud family's reputation. But when Kate's condition worsened and she needed emergency surgery, do you know who stayed by her side all night? Patricia was speechless. Yes, Kate's parents. They may be middle class, but their love was real. And they tried to accept our family. But you. The groom James quietly stepped forward. With the cool gaze of a cardiac surgeon, he looked at Patricia, his mother-in-law, and said, As a doctor, I have faced many hearts. But I have never seen one as deeply wounded as today. Hearing those words, Patricia's shoulders shook violently. Her friends from the social circle turned away from her, one by one. The dignity she had built over the years as a society queen was crumbling like a sandcastle, and she watched it happen in a daze. Patricia's voice cracked. I was wrong. She suddenly collapsed into a chair. Her perfectly coiffed hair came undone. Her Hermes scarf fell to the floor. She looked like a noble stripped of her mask. Everyone, I deeply apologize. Bert stepped forward and bowed towards the guests. Today we have shown you the ugly side of our family. He looked at Kate. I want to use this opportunity to rebuild our family bonds, in a true sense. Emily and James silently stepped forward. Our wedding certainly didn't go as planned, Emily said, wiping away her tears. But I sincerely hope that this day becomes a new starting point for our family. Outside the window, night was falling over Boston. The atmosphere in the hall was fading, but a new beginning was about to emerge. That night, the lights in Patricia's mansion never went out. The society queen faced true loneliness for the first time in her life. Winter had come to Beacon Hill. The Michaud family mansion, once full of warm light, was now wrapped in silence. The garden plants slept in the frosty air, and the inherited Boston fern seemed to have an even deeper green than usual. Patricia sat in front of the study fireplace, browsing a photo album. Photos of Bert's wedding, Emily's graduation. Then she stopped. There was a picture from Bert and Kate's wedding. The newlyweds' eyes reflected unmistakable love, and their smiles radiated pure happiness. Why couldn't I see this before? Patricia murmured to herself. The flames in the fireplace flickered gently, illuminating her tired expression. In the 6 months since the wedding, her life had drastically changed. Invitations from her former society friends had ceased, and she'd been asked to voluntarily resign from the Charity Association board. Even at Sunday services at St. Paul's Church, other parishioners kept their distance. The phone didn't ring and no emails arrived. The social standing she had built over 30 years had crumbled overnight. Surprisingly, it was Margaret, the associate priest, who supported her through it all. In weekly counseling sessions, Patricia began to see. Sometimes in our love we lose sight of what is most precious. Margaret's words still resonated in her ears. But it's never too late to realize this. Sitting at her desk, Patricia lifted her pen with trembling hands and began to write on an expensive Christmas card. To my beloved son and Kate. She took a deep breath and continued. I now understand how my foolishness has hurt you both. I was too caught up in my feelings for Shay to see the true happiness that was right in front of me. I will not ask for forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you this. I sincerely wish you all the happiness in the world. She wrote similar sentiments in the card to Emily and James, acknowledging that the responsibility for distorting the meaning of their wedding rested entirely with her. Acknowledging this was painful but also liberating. Patricia stood up and looked at the finished cards. Outside, the snow had begun to fall quietly. People passing by on the street were bundled in warm coats, busy with Christmas preparations. She, too, had once hosted lavish parties during the season, shining as the center of society. But now a different kind of warmth filled her heart. On the mantelpiece rested a postcard from Emily and James' honeymoon. Next to it, a photo of Robert and Kate visiting Paris. Though neither had replied to her yet, they represented a small hope that her family hadn't completely abandoned her. In a corner of the study lay unopened books on psychological counseling, family relationship healing, Intergenerational reconciliation, all recommended by Margaret. I can change, Patricia whispered softly. It's not too late. That night, the light from the windows of the old mansion on Beacon Hill seemed a little warmer than usual. The accumulating snow softly covered the mistakes of the past, painting the city white. A new year was approaching, marking not just a change on the calendar, but the beginning of a new chapter for a woman and her family. Patricia stood by the window watching the snowy scene, offering a small prayer. A prayer that, this time, they could restore family ties in the truest sense.